Well, it sounded to me like a bunch of people running around, and I'm not down with messing with locals or whatever. I don't know who the hell would come out here. What bugs me out is that we're so damn deep in the woods, and people are going to try and come out here and mess with us, then they got to have something wrong with them, and I'm not going to play with that.
Well, how do we know it was people?
Well, even if it wasn't, I'm not going to play with that either.
Deep in the Aspen Grove. This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I'm a USAF Security Forces airman, military police. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, who was also another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used and many totally forgotten and overgrown. Nick and I spent many of our days off starting on these roads that we knew, finding ones that we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on and began the drive into the mountains. After driving around for an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange, and the overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, it was nearly impossible to see far into the trees as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5", and regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small, one-man tent was set back in the trees about 50 feet from this strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it, so Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area. But we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if someone had been kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up, and my senses were on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over the place. No fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I was leaving, I heard Nick start yelling, let's go, let's get the fuck out of here!" Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw an old beat-up Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men, and a third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road, and Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still don't know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police and they promised to send a trooper out to check the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing was all gone, though we could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area and do not intend to. Followed in Wolf Creek, submitted by 2 Cows. This happened about 6 years ago. I was 22 at the time, and I'm from a little town in the middle of nowhere called Wolf Point, Montana. I had just come home for my last summer after college and was planning on moving to Seattle before the fall. I had a summer job that I hated at a restaurant, and as much as I love my mom and grandparents, I was ready to leave this place. My boyfriend was going to come up for a week, and we planned on taking my uncle's quads out to the wilderness, and then hiking along Wolf Creek to camp and just chill. I'm a workout fiend, but I hadn't done a lot of walking over semi-tough land in a while, and was looking forward to this. My boyfriend, let's call him Jacob, and I'll call myself Mark, he came up early on a Friday morning. He lived in Missoula, where we both went to school, and he drove up halfway the night before, stopped for a while, and then drove the rest of the way from Billings. Wolf Point is really in the middle of no fucking where. Anyway, Jacob got there and went straight to my house as I had to finish a breakfast-lunch shift. He got some more sleep after hanging out with my mom, who loved him to death, and I still think is mad at me that we're no longer together. I got off work, and we immediately began to get things ready. We got packs, food, little camping stoves, all that kind of stuff. My uncle had hooked up a little trailer on my quad, so after loading up most of the gear, we had dinner with my mom and grandparents, and then went to bed early so we could get up early too. Everything was awesome, and we woke up around 5. Got some breakfast, double-checked our food and water and gear, and off we went. My mom's place is on the northern edge of town, so getting out to where we wanted to go was not a problem at all. Jacob had never ridden a quad, so I spent a lot of that morning helping him get the hang of things, and we spent at least an hour in a clear area that butted up against some farmland. Private properties dotted Wolf Creek here and there, but the farther north you go, the less people you're likely to see. We were skirting the creek and not following it per se because it's pretty windy and turning. At one point, we stopped for something to eat, and I think that's where someone saw us. We were just talking, and before we got going, Jacob told me he had something to tell me, and I asked him what. He told me he loved me for the first time, and we kissed. Looking back, I'm convinced someone from afar could see us in the distance and did not appreciate this gesture and began following us. I can't prove that, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me. We kept riding, and sometime in the early afternoon we stopped, stashed the quads under some trees, and covered them with a camouflage tarp. We were going to continue hiking north up the middle fork of Wolf Creek and camp near the water and just chill with some weed and a bottle of Jack Daniels. It was around 5 or so when we stopped and set up camp under some trees. We pitched our tent, gathered up a ton of dead wood for a fire, and then made something to eat on our little stoves. Jacob got a fire going, and we were just relaxing, sharing a bowl and sipping on the JD. The sounds of the wilderness at night were all around us, and we could hear coyotes off in the distance. It was so peaceful. As the fire died down, we turned in for the night. I was awoken around 2 to what sounded like footsteps, but I couldn't be sure right away. But I definitely heard twigs snapping and what I thought was breathing. The steps never came into the immediate camp. They just circled around and around. and wake up Jacob, and I was going back and forth wondering if it was just an animal scouting us out or if it was someone out to bust us for being on their land or whatever. The more I listened, the more I decided it was something walking on two legs. Eventually, it stopped or went away, and I fell back asleep. We woke up, had some breakfast, and I never mentioned anything to Jacob. Maybe in retrospect I should have. We kept on hiking and did that for most of the day, stopping only occasionally to take some pictures and stuff of the things we found, and were just goofing off having a good time. Late in the day, we again found another good place to camp and set things up. This time, we just drank the booze and didn't fire up, and we talked into the night about what we were going to do now that we were out of school. He wanted to pursue a master's degree, and I just wanted to start working. As I mentioned, we were planning on moving to Seattle. We were so into talking about our trip there to scout out housing that I never noticed the footsteps again until they were just outside the light of the fire. Jacob noticed this time and said, "You hear that?" I said, "Yeah," and told him it was probably just an animal. A little while later, we heard more footsteps, and I thought maybe it was some deer or something, but it became clear it was human footsteps. Then we heard hoarse whispering, so we knew for sure it was people. I called out hello, but no one answered. "We've got some Jack Daniels and Cokes over here if you want to hang out," I said. Nothing, no response. And the footsteps started again and faded away. At this point, I wasn't scared, but I was a little bit uneasy. Jacob was taking it in stride and was cool, and a little while later we heard quads or something far in the distance, and I said it must have just been landowners checking on us or something. We went to sleep, and when we woke up is when things went downward quickly. I crawled out of the tent to see Jacob standing there, staring. "Mark, I think we need to leave now." I looked to where he was looking, and on a branch hanging over the creek, there was a noose dangling down, and a piece of paper was nailed to the tree. It said, "Faggots, get out." Spelled Fagutz, and it looked like a little kid wrote it. We still got the message. Faggots, get out. My stomach dropped, and I looked at Jacob, who I could see was visibly shaken. Now, Missoula isn't a metropolis, but this kind of shit doesn't happen there. However, out here, being gay isn't always an accepted thing. "Let's go home, please," said Jacob. I said okay, and we got something to eat and quickly picked up camp. I took some pictures of the noose and sign on my phone and made a mental note of where we were. I was going to tell the police about it. We started back and were hiking faster than we did the day before. I was cringing inside because I knew we had to spend another night out here before we got back to the quads. I was kicking myself for wanting to rough it, knowing that we'd be home faster if we just rode the quads all the way out here. We were roughly in the same spot as the first night, and I was not okay with staying in the same place, so we walked on for a little more in the dark. We decided to skip the fire and just eat and get some sleep so we could be up early and get out of there. I know we were both nervous, but we were tired too. We tried to have one person on watch while the other slept, but I ended up falling asleep too while I was supposed to be watching. It was about 2 a.m. again, and I woke up to the snapping twigs again, and this time louder voices. Whoever was out there now was not hiding the fact that they were there. I got out of the tent and called out again and listened. The footsteps stopped, and it was just the noises of the night. Then a harsh laugh off to my left towards the creek. I said hello again, and this time something splashed in the creek water. I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it around the few trees around us and saw nothing. Then, something was thrown towards us and it landed with a loud thump on the ground in front of me. I played my light on it. It was an old hatchet. I heard the voices again, and I stumbled back into the tent, crashing into it and on top of Jacob, waking him up. There was loud laughing around us, and a voice said, "Is that how you homos do it?" Now I was scared and angry. I got up, went over to the hatchet, and picked it up, yelling, "Leave us alone! We're just trying to go home." Jacob found his way out of the tent and was holding his survival knife. Honestly, we weren't kidding anyone. If there was more than a couple of people out there, it wouldn't have been much of a fight. It was quiet for a bit, then more footsteps and whispering, and I was shining the flashlight all over the place trying to see who it was out there in the dark. Then a woman's voice called out and said, "I guess you fags can't read. Get out!" I shone the light towards the voice, and while I couldn't see who it was in the dim light, against the sky between some trees, we saw 4 shapes. There were 4 people out there. "We don't want any trouble," I said. "We're leaving. Just leave us alone." They just stood there watching as we scrambled to pack up. We got our stuff together and started walking out of the spot, and this crazy laughter filled the air. We booked it into the night. We jogged all the way back to the quads and got to them when it was still dark out. All the while, we kept looking over our shoulders, terrified of what we might see. But there was no one there. We uncovered the quads, and we found that someone had dumped some kind of animal shit all over the seats and on the handlebar grips. We wiped it off as best as we could, and we just got the fuck out of there. The only time we stopped was at an outdoor car wash to power wash everything down. We got back to my house and went inside. It was about 6 in the morning, and my mother was just getting ready for work. We told her everything, and we called the police. They came out and took our statement, and I showed them the pictures of the noose and sign, and all the shit on our quads. I still had the hatchet that they had tossed at us. Nothing ever came of it, and Jacob went home later that day. He'd had enough. We both moved to Seattle and aren't together anymore, but are still really good friends. I've told the story over and over, and I know it's not as scary as a lot of the stuff you read, Uncle Josh, but this still bothers me to this day. Last weekend, some friends asked me if I wanted to go camping, and I said no. I'm a little soured on the whole camping thing. A scream in the night. I was just about 24 years old when my cousin Charlie got throat cancer. He wasn't really my cousin, he was my dad's cousin, but for whatever reason I always called him Cousin Charlie. Anyway, he and his wife lived up around San Luis Obispo, and when he was finally recovering from cancer, he went to stay in his estate in mainland Hawaii. At one point, he needed someone to babysit his home in San Luis, so I volunteered. Fast forward. I'm staying at his place by myself, and we're talking satellite internet and television slower than a snail. I found myself enthralled in the Lord of the Rings marathon and proceeded to stay up until around 2:30 in the morning. Changing the channel meant whatever channel I was clicking meant it would choose 4 stations down from my selection, so I was hesitant to change the channel. The marathon ended, and I proceeded to make some green tea. And that's when I heard it. A distant scream, calling across the valley below. I knew it was a human scream, but for some reason I just refused to believe it. The thing about houses inland from San Luis is that you have a lot of room between your neighbors, and we're talking 2 miles apart from each other. If someone was playing music on the other side of the hill, you had no problem hearing it. I thought maybe the person screamed because they were watching a scary film, or perhaps they were playing a board game. I really don't know. I just did my best to imagine it was me over-exaggerating. About 2 minutes went by, and I passed it off at this time, getting lost in infomercials. That's when I heard something familiar to a firecracker, but then I heard it multiple times. Something didn't seem right, so I grabbed the nearest blunt object and headed upstairs. My cousin Charlie has a 360-degree second deck, which I proceeded to go to and take watch over with a fire poker. Like that would do me any good. I listened, but I could only hear the wind. I would later end up falling asleep in one of the rocking chairs, and then waking up about 40 minutes later. What I later found out from my cousin Charlie is that a man had gotten into a big argument with his wife and shot at her as she ran from the house. I also later found out that because I was the only one who had left the outside lights on, she was running towards me, but died from her wounds about 60% of the way over. This still gives me chills. The Trail Guide. Tennessee has some real bumfucky people out in nature. I hiked all around while at school there and made some good memories with a girl in the enveloping nature. Tennessee has good roads to popular hiking sites and tons of mini trails branching off. Sometimes you need to know what to look for as far as trail markers go, because the interesting ones are always a good ways out. There was this one trail that had a spring waterfall that spilled across a mossy granite wall, towering over a shallow stream that empties into a decent-sized pond. I went out there with a friend last time, and we got separated on the way out. I have no fucking clue how this happened. We've each been hiking for over 10 years, and I've run it over 1,000 times in my mind. It has to be this one ledge system. To get to the top of the falls, you need to take a longish detour that has a lot of old wooden railings and a 3-way branching ledge system. So I've taken all 3 routes and ended up at the same spot. And they take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to blast through, and they're kind of like rocky corridors. I don't take the left one anymore because I'm 90% sure these big stains in the middle are blood. I don't want to know what happened there. And it's odd because the left is by far the most inviting, flowers blooming from vines that are etched into the moss-matted bedrock. Anyways, I'm 45 seconds ahead of her, and I opt for the right path when I realize I should tell her to avoid the left. It's really hard to reverse, given the sloping angle of the path and a few short drops that become narrow climbs. Fuck it. Faster if I speed through and then just yell down. I get out of the right corridor, swing around to where the middle path drops off, yell, and there's no reply. She must have taken the left. I run over and climb into the left corridor, thinking that she saw the stains and freaked out. I mean, it really looks like someone got bludgeoned to death, to be fair. She was fucking gone. Ashley? Nothing. And that's what made my hair stand up. I literally heard nothing. No birds, no hum of the forest, not even wind, just myself and the babbling water. I traced left all the way back and noted a few side passages if you miss a couple of the jumps. No bodies were in there, or the middle though, which was good. I figure I might as well go to the top of the falls where I can get somewhat of an aerial view. And I get there, and Ashley is there waiting for me. She says she took the left path with the trail guide. What? There are no trail guides. There are rangers, but she knows the difference. They wouldn't be in the rock labyrinth. She said this guy had a uniform on and a trail authority visor. She knew what I was thinking based on my face, and agreed that we should reverse course ASAP without us saying anything out loud. Man, it's weird when you know you're being watched. So, yeah, we pretend we're going back to the car real quick to get more water, and so I left some fish food in a little crevice like I always did, and we left. She showed me this weird side passage that could not have existed a year before. I walked all the way around. You had to crouch, but you could walk through the labyrinth if you kept left. In hindsight, we should have taken another way. I think this guy lives in those tunnels. She said he kept trying to lead her in different directions, but she just followed the light and saw him standing in the tunnel as she walked the rest of the trip to the top. That means he was there when I was looking for her. That means she followed him before seeing the blood splatters or whatever all over the floor and walls. And that's not the totally fucked part. The fucking fish food was on the hood of my car. And her water bottle was gone too. She had it carabinered to her pack, so he must have snuck up and taken it at some point. We hiked fast too. Never went back, and will not. In the Middle of Nowhere by Queen Beatrice II. September 2010, my boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, and my best friend Liz and I were all coming back to our hometown after our final year of college, after spending the summer in London. We'd had a fantastic time staying in my uncle's apartment, partying and exploring such a big city. It was great. We'd stopped to stay at a B&B the night about halfway home, and we were planning to get home around 6 p.m. We all woke up early, around 4 or 5, ready to set off again, when we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broke the right wing mirror off. Seeing as how it was my dad's birthday present to me and I'd barely had it 2 months, I was absolutely fuming. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use for the time being, and she said she'd driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she drew us a rough map, and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she'd circled it in, the more desolate the surroundings were. The roads got more difficult and had gone from stone to dirt, and around us there weren't any farms anymore, just long, weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to head off because of the wild animals, and I'd just have to get over being a paranoid driver and deal without my wing mirror, when surely enough, my boyfriend pointed out to a handwritten sign that was directing us 2 miles down the road to Cafe and Car Spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by forest, and we all got out, except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with cafe spray painted on the roof, a caravan, and a hill of metal and bits of cars. As to be expected, we were the only visitors parked up in front. The sun was up, but no lights or people were around, and I guess they were still sleeping. It was around 6 anyway. We all walked up to the scrap pile, and I had a fumble through looking for a wing mirror or any sort of mirror that could do for the time being until I could get mine repaired. Tony picked up what had to have been at least a decade-old mirror and suggested we just take it and go. But me, being stupid and sincere me, insisted I have to give them some money for it. I can't just take it and go. So I knocked on the door and waited. A big, hard-faced man opened the door, and at first he looked pissed off and tired. But then he smiled at me, a two-toothed smile. He leered at me for a few seconds, and then seeing the boys approach, asked us what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror and asked how much, and he said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought, fair enough. 2 more men then left the patio door on the other side of the place. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and they came over. Oh, they stank. He gave them the mirror and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat us down on the patio chairs, and offered us some sandwiches. I politely declined, but he insisted we must be hungry and told me to come in and that women are the best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a little bit sexist at this point. When he asked again, Dave, more sternly, reinforced that I said I didn't want to come in. Ian muttered something and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly as he started asking us questions. It started off innocently, like asking how old we were, where we were from, etc. But then it became a little uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then he started asking us both what we like to do to each other, how often we have intercourse, and weird private stuff like that, to which we didn't answer. We just sat in silence, until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men that was supposed to be fixing the mirror with his hand in the back window grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off the patio. Tony was running after the guys, but they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car and a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have felt. So I got into the back seat with her and consoled her while Dave came around the other side to get in and told us some nails were on the floor. We looked over and there were about 12 of them arranged around the tire, like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts. We decided that was enough. We didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror. We were ready to go when Tony was the last one to get in the car. He closed the back seat door, and as we looked back and saw Ian re-emerge from the house with something long in his hands, and was running towards us. My vision adjusted when he got a bit closer, and then I realized he was holding a rifle. A fucking hunting rifle. At that point, I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go, and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever until that scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway getting home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take a train. I'm still terrified I'll meet them again. Hey gang, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this volume of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories, scary stories from the middle of nowhere. I've got to be honest, I have camped in a lot of remote places, and once in a while you do have that weird sound that you're pretty sure is not a deer or a bear, and all I can say is one round from an Ultramag 300, pretty much clears out the neighborhood. Not that I condone that sort of thing. If you have a scary story, please send it to me. I would love to read it. I read them all. Send anything you've got to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and share this video as well. If you care to, leave a comment. I respond to all the comments. Please follow me on social media. All of the links for my outlets are in the description below. And if you would like to help keep this channel rolling, you can follow me on Patreon and become a patron. For as little as $1, you will get extra perks and all of my content early before it's posted on YouTube. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. Could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.